This is a story of love, deception, and second chances. A tale of trust, betrayal, and justice. Henry is sitting in a tan easy chair. He is reading a book entitled Strategic Investing. His cell phone is on an end table along with a glass of Cabernet. Henry is a trim 74-year-old man. His silver gray hair and neatly trimmed mustache give him a distinguished look. Henry's cell phone rings. He glances at the screen. The caller is his son, Danny. He smiles and then answers the call. "Hello, Danny. It's been quite a while since you called me. Is everything okay?" said Henry. "Oh, I'm doing just fine, Dad. How about yourself? How are you doing?" said Danny. "Well, pretty good for an old geezer. When are you and the kids coming down to Florida to visit me?" said Henry. "That's what I want to talk to you about, Dad. I found someone and we're planning on getting married," said Danny. Henry frowned slightly. "I hope you didn't meet her in a bar like you met Julie," said Henry. "No, I didn't meet her in a bar. We met through a dating service for professionals," said Danny. Henry shook his head and said, "Geez, Danny, I thought you were smarter than that. Those dating services are just a bunch of crap. I hope you didn't..." Danny interrupts Henry. "Now hold on, Dad. This is not what you think. I use the service specifically for professional people. You can't believe the screening and background checks I had to go through just to get approved." "Son, I hope you're not rushing into this," said Henry. "Dad, it's been almost 5 years since Julie and I got divorced. I wouldn't call that rushing," said Danny. "Dad, I've been seeing Rose now for over a year. I'd like to bring her down to meet you," said Danny. Henry gets a big grin and says, "Well, that'd be nice. I haven't seen the kids in a while." "Well, it'll just be Rose and me. The kids have too much going on at school," said Danny. "Oh, well, all right. Well, I'll bring this Rose over. How old is she? How many times has she been married? You gotta watch out for gold diggers. How do the kids feel about this?" "I assume you told them of your plans," said Henry in a snotty tone. Danny became agitated and said, "Dad, she's only a year older than me, and she's only been married once. Actually, her situation was much like mine was with Julie. She had a cheating dirtbag of a husband. Oh, and by the way, the kids just love her." "Danny, I'm sorry if I sound cynical. I'm just looking out for your own good. Come on down. It'll be nice," said Henry. "Thanks, Dad. I'll send you our flight dates." "Love you," said Danny. "Love you too. Have a nice trip, son," said Henry. Henry put the cell phone down and took a big sip of wine, then sighed and shook his head from side to side. 2 weeks later, Henry is sitting in a tan leather easy chair reading the Wall Street Journal. A glass of wine is on an end table. Henry puts the paper down and takes a small sip of wine. The doorbell rings and Henry takes another bigger sip. He opens the front door and is greeted by Danny and Rose. Henry and Danny hug. Henry studies Rose, then smiles and shakes her hand. Rose is a tall and very attractive brunette who looks much younger than her 46 years. "You must be Rose. Nice to meet you," said Henry. Rose tries to conceal her nervousness and replies, "Nice to meet you, sir." Henry motions to Danny and says, "Danny, put your luggage in the guest room." He notices Rose's nervousness and says, "Rose, please relax. I don't bite." "Please sit down. How was your flight?" "Just fine, sir," said Rose. "Rose, please call me Henry," said Henry with a smile. "Well, thank you, Henry. Daniel has told me a lot about you, especially the story of how you started your plastic company," said Rose as she began to relax in Henry's presence. Henry laughed and said, "Well, now, Rose, you don't want to believe everything Danny tells you. Truth be told, I had to start that company because no one would hire me." "Oh, I find that hard to believe, sir, Henry," said Rose with a smile. Danny enters the room and sits down next to Rose. "You're looking pretty good, Dad. How's your blood pressure been?" said Danny. "Real good. My doctor said I don't need to take blood pressure pills anymore, said Henry. Are you kidding me? What's changed, said Danny. Henry holds up a glass of wine and says, I drink a bottle of this every day. Dad, said Henry. Henry laughed and said, just kidding. I've been going to the gym every morning faithfully, but I do have a couple glasses of wine with my dinner every day. Are you a wine connoisseur, Henry? Said Rose. Henry laughs heartily and says, Rose, I'm hardly what you'd call a connoisseur. My favorite wine is a Cabernet called Winking Owl. I get it from Aldi's and it's $3.95 a bottle. Seriously, all I know about wine is when you're supposed to drink white wine. And what is that? Said Rose. Oh, here it comes, says Danny. Well, you only drink white wine when you're out of red, said Henry with a smile. Well, that's funny, said Rose. Henry stands up and says, please excuse me, nature is calling. He leaves the room. Danny looks at Rose and says, so what do you think of the old man? I like him. You shouldn't think of him as an old man. He looks pretty chipper to me, said Rose. He likes you, I can tell, said Danny, holding Rose's hand. How is that? Said Rose. He only tells his wine stories to people he likes, said Danny. Henry comes back and looks at his watch. I bet you kids are getting hungry. Why don't we go out and have some dinner? Rose, do you like German food? Said Henry. Oh, yes, I do. My parents used to take me to some of the best German restaurants in Milwaukee, said Rose. Henry smiled and said, good, I've got the perfect place. Danny is sitting on the sofa viewing emails on his cell phone. Henry enters the room and sits down. Where's Rose? Said Henry. She's still sleeping. She really enjoyed the dinner last night, said Danny. I like Rose. She's down to earth and not pretentious. You made a good choice, son, said Henry. Danny smiled and said, yeah, I think so too. The service I used to help Rose worked out pretty good for me. Dad, I'm glad we have a few moments alone to talk. Have you ever talked about meeting someone? It's been 6 years since Mom died in that car accident. I know you still blame yourself, but it wasn't your fault she went out in that snowstorm. It's time for you to... Henry abruptly interrupts Danny and says, damn it, son, it was my fault. If I would have picked up the stuff she had asked for, she wouldn't have gone out that day. Dad, stop it, please. It's not your fault. When I get back, I'm going to send you some information about the service that I use. At least take a look at it, said Danny. Henry sighed and said, yeah, okay. Rose enters the room. Henry smiles and says, good morning, dear. Good morning, Henry. Thank you for the dinner last night. It was as good as some of Milwaukee's finest, said Rose. Glad you enjoyed it. Let's go get some breakfast. I know a cute little place right on the water, said Henry. Danny and Rose are sitting on the sofa. Henry is sitting in an easy chair. Danny and Rose's luggage are next to the door. I could have driven you to the airport. It's only a half hour away, said Henry. Well, Uber is so convenient. We use it all the time. Saves a lot of hassle, said Danny. Henry grinned and said, well, I guess I'm still in the dark ages. Truth be told, I've never used it. In fact, I'll be driving up to Milwaukee for the wedding. Danny frowns and said, Dad, you really ought to fly up. It's over a 1,400-mile drive. I love to drive. I hate going through airports. Remember, I drove my Harley back from Sturgis in one day. That was over 900 miles, sonny boy, said Henry. Yeah, and how old were you back then, too, said Danny. Did you have a motorcycle, Henry, said Rose. Henry gets a big grin on his face and says, yep, I used to have 3 Harleys in my garage at all times. Rose smiled and says, oh, I've always wanted to ride on a Harley. Danny's cell phone rings. He answers the call. Uber is here. Time to go, Dad, said Danny. They all get up and go to the door. Henry gives Rose a big hug, then looks into her eyes. It was so nice meeting you, Rose. Danny is a very lucky boy, said Henry. Thank you, Henry, said Rose as she gives Henry a hug and kiss on his cheek. Henry and Danny hug. See you next month, son, said Henry. I'll send you the information on that website I told you about, said Danny. Henry frowns and says, don't waste your time. I'm really not interested. Well, at least take a look at it, okay, said Danny. All right, I'll take a look, but don't hold your breath. You have a safe trip back, son, and you take care of Rose. She's a keeper, said Henry. I will. I love you, Dad, said Danny. Love you too, son, said Henry. Danny and Rose leave. As Henry sits down, the doorbell rings. He opens the door and Martha enters. She is carrying an attaché case. Martha is a 60-year-old woman with a mature but attractive look and always impeccably dressed. She serves as Henry's attorney. Hello, Martha. Come on in, said Henry with a smile. Martha shakes Henry's hand and says, Henry, I bumped into Danny on the way in. He introduced me to his future bride. She looks like a very nice person. Yes, she is, very nice. Danny got lucky, said Henry. Where did he meet someone so nice, said Martha. With a slight frown, Henry says, believe it or not, he met her through a dating service. He said it was for professional people. Oh, I know all about that type of service. How do you think I met my Donald, said Martha. You're kidding. Well, actually, Don never did mention how you two met, said Henry. As you have probably noticed, Don is a very private person on certain matters, said Martha. I am a private person, too. I wouldn't want to advertise that I met my wife through a dating service, said Henry. Martha smiles and says, why not? That's nothing to be ashamed of. And it wasn't really a dating service. It was more of a meeting place for people with like backgrounds. It sure beats the bar scene. Henry, you ought to really give it a try. You ought to talk to Donald about it. He'll give you the straight scoop. Henry ignores Martha's comment and says, what brings you here today, Martha? Martha opens up her attaché case and says, just a firm offer I received on your lake home in Wisconsin. Are you sure you really want to sell it? Martha hands Henry a document and he studies it. Yes, I do. Danny never goes there and I've just lost interest in the place. You can accept this offer, said Henry with a sigh. Will do, and I'll have Donald give you a call about our experience with the professional dating service we used, said Martha. Henry is sitting in an easy chair drinking a Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. His cell phone rings and he looks at the screen, then answers the call. Hello, Don, said Henry. Henry, how's it going, said Don. Pretty good, Don. What can I do for you, said Henry. Not a thing, but I've got something for you to think about, said Don. Oh, I'm listening, said Henry. Martha told me about Danny, and she mentioned how he met his future bride. I know I never mentioned it to you, but that's how I met Martha, said Don. Henry laughs and said, I thought you met her at a nudist colony. You say you met her through a dating service? You're putting me on. A nudist colony, now that's a novel idea. Yes, we did meet through a service for professionals. Very similar to what your Danny used, said Don. Henry laughs harder and says, I think I'd prefer a nudist colony. Yeah, I'd like to see you at a nudist colony. Seriously, you ought to give this a try. It'd work good for Martha and me. I'm going to email you some information. At least take a look at it. Say, Henry, there's a new seafood restaurant on Longboat Key. It's called Higgins on the Reef. They're supposed to have pretty good seafood, and they have an excellent wine cellar. How about joining me and Martha on Saturday, said Don. Do they have winking owls, said Henry. You and your winking owl. We'll pick you up at 5:30, said Don. Sounds good. And oh, by the way, I had a sip of a $1,000 bottle of wine. I'd almost prefer winking owl, said Henry with a grin. Take care. See you on Saturday, said Don. Henry puts the cell phone on the table. He gets a pensive look on his face and looks upward towards the ceiling for a bit. Thoughts run through Henry's mind. Maybe I ought to give that service a try. Danny found a real beauty and a decent person. And Martha isn't anything to sneeze at either. Henry gets up and walks over to a desk. He sits down and begins typing on a laptop computer. Henry types and stops to stare at the screen several times. After an hour of browsing has passed, he picks up his cell phone and dials a number. "Hello, is this Diana?" said Henry. Diana is seated at a corner table at Higgins on the Reef. She is a very attractive woman in her mid-60s. Her perfectly styled hair give her an elegant and sexy look. Thoughts run through Diana's mind. "I've never done this before. I've been warned about gold diggers. I'll be on my guard and check this Henry guy out carefully." She looks at her watch and frowns. A waiter approaches the table. The waiter smiles and says, "Welcome to Higgins on the Reef, ma'am. May I interest you in a beverage?" "I suppose so. I'll have a Park Avenue Estate Chardonnay," said Diana curtly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, we don't carry that one. May I suggest something?" said the waiter. Diana frowns and says, "I thought this place had a good wine cellar. Just bring me a glass of your best Chardonnay, okay?" "Yes, ma'am," said the waiter as he rolled his eyes. The waiter leaves. Diana looks at her watch again. Henry approaches the table. He looks around and then notices Diana. Thoughts run through Henry's mind. "Wow, she looks better than her picture. This could be very interesting." Henry gives a big smile and says, "You must be Diana. I'm Henry." Thoughts run through Diana's mind. "He's not bad looking. He's probably a gold digger. I better show him who's boss right off the start." "You're late," said Diana with a frown. Henry sat down and said, "Sorry, I got caught up in traffic. There was a bad accident on I-75 and things really slowed down." Diana forced a small smile and said, "Yes, that will slow things down somewhat." The waiter approaches with Diana's drink. "Here's your Chardonnay, ma'am." "Sir, would you care to order a beverage?" said the waiter. "Yes, I'll have a glass of your house Cabernet," said Henry. Diana winces slightly. Henry notices her wincing. "Excuse me, is there something wrong?" said Henry. "No, nothing's wrong," said Diana. They converse in generalities for a while, then Diana says, "So tell me, Henry, I see you like to travel. What's your favorite country abroad? I just love Paris." "Well, truth be told, Diana, I've never been out of the country," said Henry. "You've never been out of the country? What could you possibly see in the States? How boring," said Diana in a condescending tone. Henry tried to uplift the conversation and said, "In the summertime, I love going out west on my motorcycle and visiting national parks. In the winter, I did a lot of skiing out west. I wasn't bored," said Henry with a grin. "You had a motorcycle. Was it a BMW?" said Diana. "No, it was a Harley Davidson," said Henry. "A Harley Davidson? I suppose you also have some tattoos," said Diana. "Yep, I have a few tattoos. Does that bother you?" said Henry. "Would you like to see them?" "Ew, no. It's just that I've never dated a man with tattoos," said Diana. Henry laughs heartily and says, "Well, neither have I." Diana is not amused by Henry's comment. She tries to regain her composure and forces a slight smile. Henry studies her intently. Thoughts run through Henry's mind. "Shit, what an arrogant bitch." "So, Henry, I see you were in the plastics business." "Tell me, Henry, exactly what did you do in the plastics business?" said Diana in a snotty tone. Henry leads towards Diana and says, "I swept the floors." Diana frowns and says, "You swept the floors?" Henry in a loud tone says, "Yes, I swept the floors, I loaded the trucks, and I answered the phone. And I also signed the damn checks." Henry stands up and places his napkin gently on the table. Diana sits motionless with a surprised look on her face. "Diana, my wife passed away over 6 years ago, and you are the first woman I've ever dated since her passing. You are also one of the most attractive women I've ever met. That said, you are also just way too sophisticated for an old ham and egger like myself. I'm sorry for wasting your time, and I hope you do meet someone that meets your standards. The waiter approaches the table with Henry's drink. Your drink, sir, said the waiter. Henry reaches for his billfold and hands the waiter two $100 bills and says, I won't be having that drink. Here's $200 for the drinks and whatever the lady orders. You keep the rest. Henry turns and starts to leave. Diana stands up. She has a tear in her eye and says, Henry, please come back. Henry ignores Diana's pleas and leaves. As Henry drives home in his silver BMW, thoughts run through his mind. He says to himself, I'm really proud of myself for being reasonably polite. I really wanted to tell her what an obnoxious and arrogant bitch she really was. Well, I'm glad I didn't use the F word, although I probably should have. Well, that does it for dating services. Henry is sitting in an easy chair, reading a book entitled The Battle of the Little Bighorn. His cell phone rings. He looks at the screen, then answers the call. Henry smiles and says, Don, how are you? Just fine. Say, I'm curious. Well, maybe just plain nosy. How did your date go last night with Diana? Said Don. How in the hell did you know about that? That service told me that everything is confidential, said Henry in a loud voice. Relax, Henry. It just so happens that Martha and I were at Higgins last night, and we saw you there. Martha has worked with Diana, and we thought it best to leave you two alone. She's a real looker, huh? Said Don. I'll give you that. She is a looker, but way too snooty for my taste. I left after 5 minutes, said Henry. My goodness, what happened? Said Don. Well, first of all, she was ticked off because I was a little late, and then I got the 3rd degree. I don't mind questions, but it was the way she put them, said Henry. That's strange. I always found her to be a nice, pleasant person. I hope you weren't too hard on her, said Don. Nah, maybe I overreacted a bit, but I was reasonably polite. I'll tell you what, Don, I'm through with that dating crap, said Henry. Well, sorry it didn't work out for you. Well, I'll see you at the club tomorrow, said Don. Yep, see you tomorrow, said Henry. Martha is selecting pasta at Gina's Italian Deli when Diana walks towards her. Martha turns and greets Diana. They hug. Diana points to the pasta and said, This is the best pasta in Florida. Martha smiles and says, That's for sure. Say, Donald told me about your date last night with our friend Henry. What happened? Diana sighs and says, I don't really know what got over me last night. This was the first time I've had a date since my divorce. I guess I was trying to appear sophisticated. I probably really overdid grilling the poor guy. I was worried about someone after my money. You hear so much about that kind of thing going on today. There's a lot of gold diggers out there, and they're not all women. Martha smiles and says, Well, I'd hardly call Henry a gold digger. He's done very well for himself. He owned one of the biggest plastic companies in Wisconsin. I believe this was his first date since his wife died in a car accident 6 years ago. Why don't I see if you and Henry can meet again? Diana sighs again and says, I don't know. You can try if you want to, but I don't think he'd want to see me again. I'm really ashamed how I treated him, but I wouldn't mind seeing him again, said Diana. He's one of my clients. I've known Henry for years. He and my Donald are good friends. I'll talk to him. Let's see what happens, said Martha. Henry is seated at a desk typing on his computer. The doorbell rings. He opens the door and Martha enters. She is carrying a small briefcase. Well, hello, Martha. What brings you over today? Did I forget to sign something on the lake house deal? Please sit down. Would you like a drink? Said Henry. Martha smiles and says, No drinks for me. I'm meeting a client shortly. And no, you're all set with the lake house deal. I want to talk to you about Diana. We work together. She told me about the dinner date she had with you. She feels... Henry interrupts Martha and grins. So she's a lawyer. Well, that explains things, said Henry. Martha sighs and frowns. "Ah, that was rude of me. I'm sorry. I wasn't referring to you," said Henry, sheepishly. "That's okay. Diana really feels bad about the way she acted. That's not her style. For your information, her situation is sort of similar to yours. She divorced a cheating husband 3 years ago. Your dinner date was the first date she's had since the divorce. Diana wants to meet with you again," said Martha. "Well, I can understand why she had her guard up, but she came on way too strong for me. You can tell her that I have no hard feelings, but I'm really not interested into getting into any long-term relationships with her or anyone else for that matter. No more dates for me," said Henry. "Okay, Henry, I'll respect your wishes," said Martha with a sigh. "Thank you. I appreciate your understanding," said Henry. Eve is sitting in the corner of a hotel lounge smoking a cigarette. She is a very attractive 60-year-old woman with short blonde hair and a voluptuous figure. Eve always beamed when people told her that she resembled Doris Day. Of course, looking like Doris Day helps her in her life's work. An overweight man with a slovenly appearance walks in and sits at Eve's table. "Sorry I'm late. There was an accident on I-75 again," said Dick. "Don't worry about it. What do you have for me?" said Eve impatiently. "I've got a good one for you, my dear," said Dick, as he wiped sweat from his face and smiled. He shows Eve a sweat-stained paper. "This guy is from Milwaukee and he lives in the area. He just sold a lake property in Wisconsin for $540,000. He lives in the nearby Royal Damar community. You have to have a few bucks to live there." Eve's eyes light up. Dick smiles and says, "It gets better." "This guy's been a widower for 6 years. He's in his 70s, and I'm sure he's ripe for the picking," said Dick. "How can I meet him? Any suggestions?" said Eve. Dick wheezes and says, "I found out that he likes to go to a certain beach on the bay several times a week. He seems to be a regular on Wednesdays." "How do you dig up all of that shit?" said Eve with a puzzled look. Dick grins and says, "That's my little secret, dear." "Well, whatever. Just give me his information, okay?" said Eve impatiently. "First, I want $2,000 in cash," said Dick. Eve sighs. She reaches into her purse and says, "Your prices have gone up. Take it or leave it. You have no idea what I go through to get all this information. I've got overhead, and I needed to spend some money around to get those medical documents," said Dick. Eve hands Dick a stack of cash. Dick carefully counts the stack and then says, "Thank you, dear." He gives a sweat-stained envelope to Eve. "Let me know how this one turns out. Maybe I'll deserve a bonus on this one," said Dick. Eve gives Dick a frown. Henry is sitting on a park bench at St. Pete's Beach. He is smoking an Ashton cigar and watching the waves roll up on the beach. The temperature is in the 90s, but a breeze makes for a pleasant day. As Henry sits, thoughts run through his mind. He thinks of his wife Rosa and the 44 years they spent together. His thoughts always seem to go back to the time when he saved a plastic manufacturing company from bankruptcy. After the chairman refused Henry's recommendations to reward the executives and employees who were instrumental in the turnaround, Henry became very unhappy with the chairman's short-sightedness and broken promises. When he told Rosa, "I can't work for that man anymore. I'm going to look for another position, even if it means a pay cut." Rosa smiled and said, "You're not going to work for anyone again." It was shortly thereafter when Henry and Rosa sold their home, moved into an apartment with their 3 children, and started a plastics company named Dynaseal. Dynaseal grew to become the largest of its kind in the state of Wisconsin. How many wives would give up absolute security to start a business? Rosa did. As a tear began to form in Henry's eye, he noticed 2 women walking towards him. One of the women was elderly with white hair and appeared to be in her late 80s. She was using a cane and walking very slow. She was holding on to the other woman's arm, and panting heavily. They stopped by the park bench. Eve looked at Henry with sorrowful and pleading eyes. "Excuse me, sir, would you mind if my mother sat down here for just a minute or two?" said Eve. Henry studied the two women and is momentarily at a loss for words. Then he said, "Not at all. Please sit down." "Thank you, sir," said Eve. Eve helped the elderly woman sit down. The elderly woman immediately dozed off. Henry gets a concerned look and says, "Is your mother okay? Would she like something to drink? I have some spring water in my car." Eve looks into Henry's eyes and then touches his arm and in a quiet voice says, "Oh, that's so kind of you. She will be just fine. Thank you, sir." "My name's Henry," said Henry. "Well, thank you, Henry. My name is Eve," said Eve with a smile. "Looks like your mother is sleeping. Are you sure she's okay?" said Henry. "Well, mother's okay. She dozes off occasionally during the day. I'm used to it," said Eve. "Do you take care of her?" said Henry. "Yes, I'm her caretaker," said Eve. "Oh, that's very kind of you and your husband," said Henry. "I don't have a husband, Henry. I've never been married," said Eve. In an apologetic tone, Henry says, "I'm sorry, Eve. I didn't mean to pry." "You're not prying, Henry," said Eve. "How long have you been taking care of your mother?" said Henry. Eve sighs and says, "For over 20 years. "I admire you for that, Eve," said Henry. Eve looks into Henry's eyes and touches his arm again and says in a soft, sultry voice, "Why, thank you, Henry." Henry smiles and studies Eve intently. He looks down for a while, then he looks up and bites his lip. Henry looks into Eve's eyes and says, "Eve, would you have dinner with me sometime?" Eve looks down and says, "Henry, are you married?" "No, I've been a widower for over 6 years," said Henry. Eve holds Henry's hand. "I'd love to come over, but I don't like to leave my mother alone." Henry grins and says, "Well, bring her along." "Well, mother doesn't do well in restaurants, especially with her dozing off," said Eve. Henry smiles and says, "Well, why don't you and your mother have dinner at my place? I'm a pretty fair chef, and if your mother gets tired, there's always a sofa nearby." "Why, that would be wonderful," said Eve. "Well, great. What kind of food does your mother like? Beef, pork, chicken, seafood?" said Henry. "Mother loves seafood, and so do I, but we don't want to put you out," said Eve. Henry grins and says, "Salmon is my specialty. Here's my card. How about next Sunday afternoon? Give me your address and I'll pick you up." "Henry, I'll drive over. Mother's only comfortable in my car," said Eve. "Well, if that's best for your mother, that works for me," said Henry. Henry then looks at his watch and says, "Eve, I have to run. I've got a board meeting to go to. See you this Sunday afternoon, say around 4 o'clock or so." Eve gives Henry a big smile and says, "Perfect." As Henry starts to stand, Eve gives Henry a light kiss on his cheek and says in a soft, sultry voice, "Henry, I'm so happy we met." Henry is speechless. He smiles at Eve and then slowly leaves. After Henry leaves, Eve and Mother slowly walk to a tan Chevrolet station wagon. When they reach the station wagon, the mother looks back over her shoulder, then takes off a white wig and shakes it. Eve frowns and says, "Hey, Dee Dee, you shouldn't take that thing off yet. He might be watching." "He ain't watching. This friggin' wig is hotter than hell, and the damn makeup itches something fierce, especially that latex part." "Eve, you put on a great performance," said Dee Dee. Dee Dee is a slim woman in her middle 50s. Her dark brown hair has a few flecks of gray in it. Eve gives a glowing smile and says, "I think we've got another live one." "You know, he sort of reminds me of my third husband." "Yeah, he does remind me of George. You know, Henry's sort of cute for an old guy and somewhat charming, but a little uptight," said Dee Dee as she takes a big swig from the silver flask. "I'll loosen him up. Give me that. I can use a drink," said Eve with a grin as she takes a big swig from the silver flask. "I'm sure you will," said Dee Dee. As Henry drives home in his silver BMW, thoughts of Eve and her mother run through his mind. It's been a long time since I met a person so sweet and caring. She's really giving up a lot to care for her sick mother. I'm really happy we met. Man, what a difference from her and that Diana person I met. Henry is putting silverware on a table when the doorbell rings. He opens the door, and Eve and her mother appear. Henry smiles and says, "Hello, Eve. Hello, Mother." Eve gives Henry a big smile and says, "Hello, Henry." The mother nods slightly and gives Henry a small smile. "Well, come on in. I hope you folks are hungry," said Henry, as he motions to the dinner table. "Why don't you folks sit down? Dinner is ready." Eve lifts her head and sniffs and says, "Something smells wonderful, Henry." Eve helps Mother to the dinner table. Mother walks very slow. Eve helps her sit down. "Excuse me while I get the food," said Henry. Henry leaves the room. Eve winks at Mother and Mother smiles back. Henry returns with a carton laden with several dishes and 2 bottles of wine. He places the dishes on the table. "I made my special, salmon a la Henry. Would you folks care for some wine? I have a Cabernet or a Chardonnay," said Henry. Eve waves her hand and says, "Oh, we'll just have water. Mother and I don't drink alcohol." "Perhaps a soda or coffee," said Henry. Eve smiles and says, "Water will just be fine, Henry." "Hope you don't mind me drinking in front of you. I always enjoy a Cabernet with my salmon," said Henry. "Are you a wine connoisseur, Henry?" said Eve. Henry grins and says, "I'm hardly what you'd call a connoisseur. If I'm in a restaurant and I like the wine, I'll ask the waiter for the name of the wine. That's how I select my wines." Eve samples the salmon and said, "Henry, this salmon is delicious, and the vegetables are wonderful. How did you become such a great chef?" "I learned on my own. I never did any cooking until my wife passed away. She died in an auto accident over 6 years ago. I never liked eating alone in a restaurant, so I taught myself how to cook," said Henry. "So you've been alone all of these years. Don't you get lonely?" said Eve. Henry sighs and says, "Yes, I miss my wife terribly. She was the finest woman I ever met. A great wife and a wonderful mother. We ran a plastics manufacturing business together. But to answer your question, I've gotten used to being alone. How about you, Eve? How come you never got married?" "Oh, I'm sorry, that's none of my business. Forgive me for asking." "That's okay, Henry. I guess I just never met the right person. And then I've been taking care of my mother for over 20 years, said Eve. "I admire you for that," said Henry. Henry and Eve converse while eating. Mother says nothing and picks away slowly at her food. Eve smiles and says, "Henry, the food was wonderful. I can't begin to thank you enough for having us over." Henry notices that Mother is sleeping and says, "Eve, your mother is dozed off. Would you like me to help you put her on the sofa for a bit?" "Oh, that would be great. Then we can chat some more," said Eve. Henry and Eve help Mother to the sofa. "Eve, would you like some dessert and coffee?" "I made a dessert using Oreo cookies and ice cream," said Henry. "Yes, I would. Thank you," said Eve. "Please sit down. I'll be right back," said Henry. Henry leaves the room and returns with dessert and coffee. Henry and Eve converse while eating and drinking coffee. "So tell me, Henry, how do you keep yourself busy during the day? With your business background, I bet you serve on the boards of a bank or two," said Eve. Henry shakes his head and says, "No, not anymore. I don't have the temperament or patience to sit through board and committee meetings anymore. I help out as an advisor, but not as a board member." "Eve, do you know the definition of a camel?" "No, please tell me," said Eve. "A camel is a horse designed by a committee," said Henry. Eve laughs and said, "That's pretty funny. I know nothing about finance or investing. My father left my mother a very small pension, just enough to get by on. I know some excellent financial planners and experts that I can put you in touch with," said Henry. "Oh, that would be wonderful," said Eve. They hear Mother stirring on the sofa as she tries to sit up. "I think it's time to take Mother home." Henry, thank you again for a wonderful evening. I can't remember when I've had such a good time. Henry smiles and says, Me either, Eve. How would you and Mother like to come over next Sunday for dinner? Oh, I don't want to be a bother. That's a lot of work for you, said Eve as she touches Henry's shoulder. It's not a bother. I enjoy doing this. Please say yes, said Henry. Yes, we'll come over, said Eve. Henry smiles and says, Great. Henry and Eve help Mother up to the door. Mother walks very slow. At the door, Eve looks deeply into Henry's eyes and gives him a hug and a kiss on his cheek. Henry is speechless and waves as they walk away. Eve and Mother slowly walk to the tan Chevrolet station wagon. After they enter the station wagon, Eve takes off the white wig and throws it into the back seat. Eve drives off and says, So what do you think? Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think this wig has to go. But I gotta tell you, Eve, you put on another Academy Award-winning performance. I don't know how you can feed 'em all that bullshit with a straight face, said Dee Dee. Eve grins and says, Remember, I did some acting when I was younger. You should have stuck with it, said Dee Dee. I got sick of having to screw directors and producers just for small bit parts, said Eve. When are you going to get him in a sack, said Dee Dee. When the time is right. We don't want to rush things. This could be our biggest score yet. Dick told me this guy just sold some lake property for big bucks, said Eve. As Henry fills the dishwasher and puts the leftovers back in the refrigerator, thoughts of Eve run through his mind. What a sweet and caring person. She seems to like me. I wonder what she sees in an old codger like me. Henry is in the kitchen seasoning 3 filet mignons when the doorbell rings. He opens the door. Henry smiles and says, Hi, folks, come on in. I've got a special dinner for you today. I hope you folks like fillets. These are fork tender and should be easy for Mother to eat. This Sunday's dinner occasion mirrored the previous Sunday's occasion. Henry and Eve converse throughout the dinner. Mother picks at her food and falls asleep again. When Eve helps Mother to the sofa, Mother coughs and falls to the floor. Henry rushes to help Eve pick up Mother and place her in a recliner. With a concerned look, Henry said, Is she okay? Should I call a rescue squad? Should we take her to the ER? Eve sighs and says, That won't be necessary. She does fall occasionally. She should be okay. Henry and Eve sit on the sofa. As they converse, Eve periodically touches Henry's chest and arms. A while later, Mother stirs and coughs. Eve stands up and says, Henry, I'm sorry, but I better take my mother home. Oh, I understand. How would you like to come over again next Sunday? Maybe a little bit earlier might work better for your mother. Say around 2 o'clock or so, said Henry. Eve gives Henry a hug and says, Henry, you're so kind. That would be great. Eve and Mother slowly walk to the tan Chevrolet station wagon. After they enter the station wagon, Dee Dee sighs and takes off the white wig. She throws it on the floor. Eve drives off and says, You won't have to worry about that wig anymore. I'll be taking over from here on. You did an awesome job of faking that fall. Dee Dee smiles. As Henry fills the dishwasher and puts the leftovers away in the refrigerator, thoughts of Eve again run through his mind. Oh, what a wonderful person I have met. It's 2:30 in the afternoon. Henry looks at his watch and sighs. I wonder what happened. I wish I had a phone number to call. He sits in an easy chair with a glass of wine. At 2:45 p.m., the doorbell rings. Henry puts the glass of wine out of sight and rushes to the door. When he opens the door, Eve is standing there alone. With a surprised and concerned look, Henry says, Hi, Eve, where's your mother? Eve sighs and says, She's not feeling well. I have a neighbor who's a nurse. She was kind enough to watch my mother. I really wanted to see you again, Henry. I'm sorry to hear your mother's not feeling well, but I'm glad you came over. I also wanted to see you again. Hope you brought a good appetite. I made Italian sausage with peppers. Why don't you sit on the sofa and relax? The food will be ready in about 15 minutes. Would you like something to drink? Said Henry. Yes, a glass of water would be fine, said Eve. I'll be right back, said Henry. Henry leaves the room. Eve rubs her eyes vigorously. When Henry returns, Eve starts to sob quietly. Henry notices her sobbing and says, Why, Eve, you're crying. What's wrong? Eve wipes her eyes and says, I'm okay, Henry. I just had a bad week, that's all. Henry puts the glass on an end table and sits down next to Eve. He holds her hands. Eve, I hate to see you upset like this. What's bothering you? Said Henry. Oh, Henry, you've been so good to Mother and I don't want to burden you with our problems, said Eve. Eve, please tell me what's bothering you. Maybe I can help, said Henry. Eve sighs and says, Mother needs a very serious operation. Without it, she won't see another Christmas. Her insurance won't cover it. Oh, Henry, I don't know what we're going to do. Eve starts sobbing and puts her head on Henry's chest. Henry hugs Eve and says, Let's have dinner. Maybe you'll feel better then. After dinner, Henry and Eve sit on the sofa. The conversation drips to Mother and her impending operation. Do you have any reports or documentation from the surgeon and also from the insurance company? Said Henry. Why, yes, I do, said Eve. Could you bring that over tomorrow, whatever you have? I've got plenty of experience in this area with my parents and my wife, said Henry. When Eve returns to her apartment, Dee Dee says, How'd it go? Great, says Eve with a smile. I'm seeing him tomorrow with the paperwork. Dee Dee gets a concerned look and says, Do you think he will buy those fake documents? Of course. We paid enough for them, and they've always worked in the past, said Eve. Eve shows Henry the documents detailing the operation. They are from a surgeon, a hospital, and an insurance company. Henry carefully studies the documents. Eve sighs and says, We could never come up with that kind of money. Henry holds Eve's hands and says, Eve, I want to help you. I have the funds to cover your needs. Oh, Henry, I don't know what to say, said Eve. Henry looks into Eve's eyes and says, I've never met a caring person like you. I admire for what you're doing for your mother. Eve, I want to keep seeing you. And I want to keep seeing you, Henry, said Eve. She kisses Henry on his cheek and then gives him a passionate kiss on the lips. Henry returns the kiss. He hugs her firmly and then places a hand on her thigh. Eve gives Henry another long, passionate kiss, then abruptly sits up. She looks at her watch and says, Oh, I completely forgot about my mother. I told the nurse I'd be back by 4:30. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Old feelings stir in Henry. Then he regains his composure and says, I understand. Can you get that nurse to watch your mother next Saturday? I'd like to take you to dinner. There's a great seafood restaurant called Higgins on the Reef. Afterwards, we'll come back here and I'll try to have a check for you. Can I pick you up? Eve hugs Henry and says, I'll meet you here. My place is such a mess with Mother's things. When Eve returns to her apartment, Dee Dee is watching television. She turns the sound down and says, How'd it go? Oh, beautiful, way better than we expected. Next Saturday, he's taking me out to dinner for someplace called Hopkins Beyond the Reef. He promised me a check for the full amount, said Eve. Wow, said Dee Dee. He's falling for me. I think I'm going to get this one to marry me. He's worth a few bucks. After I get done with him, you and me can retire in Mexico. Did you go to bed with him yet? Said Dee Dee with a wicked smile. Not yet, but I will. That always does the trick. No pun intended, said Eve with a big grin. Henry is sitting by his computer. He hits the speed dial on his cell phone. May I speak with Dr. Collins, please? Henry, what can I do for you? Said Dr. Collins. Jim, tell me about Viagra, said Henry. As Dr. Collins starts to talk, Henry's cell phone rings. He looks at the screen and says, "Jim, I'll have to call you back. I need to take this call." Henry answers the new call and says, "Hello, Martha." "Henry, I saw your call come in and I was in some heavy traffic and just couldn't take the call. What can I do for you?" said Martha. "Martha, it's a long story. I met someone and I'm seeing her," said Henry. "I thought you gave up on dating services," said Martha. "Oh, I did. I met her by accident. She's a very sweet and caring person. Sort of reminds me of Doris Day." "Eve has been taking care of her mother for many years," said Henry. "Well, that's very admirable," said Martha. "Yes, it is. I've met her mother. She's in poor health and needs a serious operation. I want to help them. I want you to go to the trust and withdraw $150,000. Have it wired to my personal checking account," said Henry. "Henry, are you sure about this? Have you checked these people out?" "Henry, how involved are you with this person? Are you falling for her?" said Martha. "Well, that's a hell of a thing to say to me. What do you take me for? Some kind of a stupid idiot?" said Henry in a loud, angry tone. "Henry, calm down. I'm only looking out for your best interests," said Martha. "Oh, sorry I yelled at you. Please just do what I asked. I've already looked at the doctor's reports and the hospital documents," said Henry. "Okay, Henry," said Martha. "Thank you. Call me if you have any problems," said Henry. Henry ends the call. A few seconds later, another call comes in. "Hello, Dad, it's me," said Danny. "Hi, Danny, how are you doing?" said Henry. "Just fine," said Danny. "Danny, your Rose is a real fine lady. You're a very lucky guy," said Henry. "Yeah, I know. Dad, Rose loves Florida. That's what I'm calling about. We're thinking of buying a condo here for when we retire," said Danny. "Well, I'd advise you not to wait. I wish I would have bought mine many years ago." "Danny, I've met someone. I never thought I'd get involved again with someone, but this woman is someone special," said Henry. "That's great, Dad. I told you those professional dating services work," said Danny. "It wasn't a dating service. We met by accident. She's a very caring person. She's a caretaker to her sick mother. I'm going to help them," said Henry. "Oh, that's nice, but be careful, Dad. There's a lot of gold diggers out there." "Well, keep me posted, Dad. I gotta run. I'm late for a meeting. Love you," said Danny. Henry frowns and says, "Yeah, love you too, son," said Henry as he ends the call. Henry mutters to himself, "Shit, everyone must think I'm stupid or something." Diana is in the seafood area at Gina's Italian Deli when Martha walks towards her. Martha is pushing a small shopping cart filled with pasta and steaks. Diana smiles and says, "Fancy meeting you here again. Are you here for the seafood sale?" Martha laughs and says, "Are you kidding? Donald won't let me bring fish into the house. I'm here for some steaks. When we go to Higgins, he orders a hamburger." "Oh, that's funny. Say, I'm curious, did you ever talk to Henry about us getting together again? I really felt bad about the way I treated him," said Diana. "Yes, I did, and he said he wasn't interested, although he did tell me that he had no hard feelings towards you. It seems like he's seeing someone that he met by accident. I think he might be falling for her," said Martha. "Oh, well, that's nice," said Diana with a slight frown. Martha sighed and said, "I suppose so, but I'm a bit concerned." "You're concerned? Why?" said Diana with a puzzled look. Martha frowned and said, "This one is taking care of her sick mother. The mother needs an operation, and Henry said he's going to help them out to the tune of $150,000 from a trust fund. Henry claims to have seen the doctor in hospital reports." Diana's eyes widen and she says, "Really? Do you happen to know what this woman's name is?" "I seem to remember something like Eva," said Martha. "Would it be Eve?" said Diana. "Yes, that's it, Eve. Why, do you know her?" said Martha. "Well, she sounds like a person I prosecuted a few years ago. She and another woman worked together and put this act on. The other woman poses as her mother. Eve is very attractive, and not bashful about hopping into bed with anyone. They research their victims and get fake hospital and doctor reports. They like to pry on elderly widowers. They're professional gold diggers, and they're very good at what they do, said Diana with a big sigh. Oh my God, poor Henry. What can we do, said Martha. Do you have any idea what this woman looks like, said Diana. I have no idea, but Henry told me she looks like Doris Day. Well, wait, maybe we can find out. Henry told Donald that he's taking this woman to dinner this Saturday at Higgins on the Reef. Maybe I can get Donald to see what she looks like, said Martha. Perfect. Get back to me as soon as possible. Oh, see if you can stall Henry with that trust fund withdrawal, said Diana. Should we tell Henry about this? I don't think he will listen to me, said Martha. Well, don't say anything to Henry yet. Let me know what Donald finds out. Once we confirm she's the one, then we can give Henry a call, said Diana. Okay, wow, I'm really glad I bumped into you today, said Martha. So am I, said Diana. Henry helps Eve out of his silver BMW. They enter Henry's condo holding hands. Eve smiles and says, Henry, that was a wonderful dinner. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Would you like something to drink, said Henry. I'll just have a glass of water, please, said Eve, as she sits down on a sofa. Sure you wouldn't want a wine or something, said Henry. No, water will be fine, said Eve. Henry leaves the room and returns with a glass of wine and a glass of water. He sets them on an end table. Henry also places his cell phone on the end table. I'm expecting a call from my friend Don about our gym dates for next week, said Henry. Henry hands Eve a glass of water and sits down. They toast each other and smile. They place their glasses back on the end table. Eve moves close to Henry and embraces him. She looks into his eyes. In a sultry voice, Eve says, Oh, Henry, I've missed you so much. Eve gives Henry a firm, passionate kiss. Henry's eyes widen and he says, I missed you too, Eve. As Henry returns the kiss, his cell phone rings. He glances at the cell phone and mutters to himself, Shit. Henry sighs and says, It's Don. Excuse me, Eve. Henry stands up and moves to a corner. He answers the call. Don, make it fast. What time do you want to meet next week, said Henry. Forget about next week. I want to talk to you about that woman you're seeing. Henry, do you? Said Don. Henry interrupts Donald. Not now, Don, said Henry. Henry, you got to listen to me, said Don. Henry interrupts Don and says, I'll call you back later. Henry ends the call and sits down next to Eve. Is everything okay, said Eve. Yes, said Henry. Henry embraces Eve. Eve gives Henry another firm, passionate kiss. Henry returns the kiss. After Henry and Eve hug and kiss for a while, Henry again places his hand on her thigh. Eve puts her head on Henry's chest and begins to sob quietly. Eve, what's wrong, said Henry. Oh, I'm so worried about Mother. She's getting worse, and the doctors want to operate as soon as possible, said Eve in a tearful voice. Eve, don't you worry. I've told my financial person to get some money transferred over from one of my trust funds. I was hoping to have the check ready today. She assured me that the funds will be available this coming week. Oh, that's so kind of you, Henry, said Eve. Eve gives Henry another long, passionate kiss, then looks at her watch and says, Oh, my goodness, I forgot about the time, Henry. I better go. I promised the nurse I'd be back by 8. I don't want to lose her. Henry tries to hide his disappointment and says, Will you come over for dinner this coming Friday? I will have a check for you by then. Eve smiles and says, I'd love to, Henry. Henry and Eve embrace, and then Eve leaves. Henry picks up the wine glass and sits in an easy chair. He takes a big sip, then leans back and closes his eyes. When Eve returns to her apartment, Dee Dee is half drunk. So how'd it go, said Dee Dee. He promised to have the check ready on Friday, said Eve. Did you get him in the sack yet, said Dee Dee, as she finished a glass of vodka. Nah, I wasn't in the mood. I suppose I'll have to give him a little on Friday. That's kind of funny. I never got more than $500 a night when I worked in Vegas. said Eve with a big grin as she watched Dee Dee pass out. Henry is watching a Green Bay Packers and Chicago Bears game on television. The Bears score, and Henry mutters to himself, "Shit, they might lose this one." The doorbell rings. Henry opens the door, and Diana appears. She is wearing a faded denim shirt with blue jeans and carrying a small briefcase. Henry is surprised. "What are you doing here? What do you want?" said Henry in a slightly harsh tone. "We need to talk, Henry. You really need to listen to what I have to say." "Please," said Diana with a pleading look in her eyes. "Okay, come on in," said Henry. "Thank you. May I sit down?" said Diana. "Yeah, sure," said Henry as he motions to the sofa. Diana sits on the sofa, takes a deep breath, and says, "First of all, I want to apologize for my rude behavior when we met." "Is this why you are here?" said Henry. Diana sighs and says, "No, it's something else. But first I want to explain my rude behavior to you. Several years ago I went through a very painful divorce. My ex was cheating on me. I was a successful lawyer and he was ruining us financially. I was talked into using that dating service. Our date was the first date I've had since the divorce. I guess I was still bitter from the divorce and leery of men. That said, that was no excuse for my rude behavior. I'm sorry." Well, truth be told, I was also talked into using that dating service. That was the first date I've had since my wife passed away. Maybe I was a bit too sensitive myself. Thank you for your explanation. "What else did you want to see me about?" said Henry with an understanding look. Diana clears her throat and says, "I understand that you're seeing a woman she's named Eve. Are you?" Henry abruptly interrupts Diana. "How in the hell did you know that? What the hell is going on here?" said Henry in a loud and angry tone. "Henry, please calm down. Let me tell you what I came here to say. Please," said Diana in a soft voice. "Well, let's have it," said Henry impatiently. "First of all, I found out about you and Eve by accident through Martha, Donald's wife. Martha and I have worked together in the past, and we've remained friends through the years. She told me about you and Eve. I used to be an assistant district attorney before I met Martha. I prosecuted Eve and her accomplice for fraud. The case was dropped. The victim refused to testify," said Diana. "I find that hard to believe. She's such a nice person, and I've met her mother. I've seen the surgeon and hospital reports on her mother," said Henry. "That's not her mother, and those reports are fake. Oh, and another thing. Eve's been married at least 3 times, plus she was a hooker in Vegas," said Diana with a slight smile. "Why are you telling me this? How can I believe you?" said Henry. Diana sighs and says, "Henry, I really feel terrible how I treated you, and I wanted to see you again. I don't want to see you get hurt." Diana reaches into her briefcase. She hands Henry a file folder and says, "In this folder are court documents and newspaper articles. Eve has done this several times before. She and her accomplice always seem to get away with her little scheme, mainly because the victims refuse to testify. Actually, I wouldn't call this a little scheme." Henry opens the file folder and carefully studies the documents. He shakes his head in disbelief and says, "I'll be a son of a bitch. Well, this is one time Eve and Mommy dear are not going to get away with it. Would you like a drink? Perhaps a glass of wine?" "Yes, I would," said Diana with a smile. "A Cabernet okay?" said Henry. "A cab is fine. Say, Henry, I need to ask you this as an attorney. Have you slept with Eve?" said Diana in a serious tone. "No, but the thought did cross my mind," said Henry sheepishly. Henry leaves and returns with 2 glasses. He hands a glass to Diana, then sits back in an easy chair. Diana raises her glass and then takes a sip. This wine is excellent. Martha told me that you were a wine gourmet," said Diana. Henry laughed and says, "Yep, I'm a real wine gourmet. You're drinking a Cabernet from Aldi's. It's called Winking Owl. It costs $3.95 a bottle. I just wanted to see if you are a wine gourmet. Actually, I think you know more about wine than I do. I have a confession to make. I've never been to Paris. Actually, your vacation sounded very interesting. I've always wanted to have a ride on a Harley, said Diana. Henry smiles and says, I've been tempted to buy one more Harley before I take up the rocking chair. Say, Diana, do you have any idea how we can send Eve and Mommy Dear to jail? She's coming over here for dinner on Friday. I was going to give her a check for $150,000. Let me think on it. Tell you what, Henry, why don't we meet at Higgins tomorrow night and we could come up with a plan? It will be my treat, said Diana. Henry nods and says, great idea. I was just going to suggest that. How about another winking owl? Well, I'd love to, but I have a meeting to go to. How does 5 sound tomorrow at Higgins, said Diana. Henry walks Diana to the door. They stop in the doorway. Henry studies Diana intently and says, I can't begin to thank you enough for exposing Eve. You're welcome, Henry. See you tomorrow at 5, said Diana. She extends her hand, offering Henry a handshake. Henry shakes Diana's hand and holds on to it for a bit. Henry finally releases Diana's hand. Diana smiles and leaves. Henry sits in an easy chair and puts a hand on his chin. He sits in deep thought and says to himself, wow. Henry is seated at a table in a secluded area. Diana approaches the table. Henry looks at his watch, then slightly frowns and says, you're late. Henry then laughs and says, just kidding. I couldn't resist saying that. Hope you didn't mind. No, I guess I had that coming, said Diana with a smile. Oh, I promise no more cutesy remarks from me. I'm glad you're here. I look forward to seeing you again, said Henry. And I look forward to seeing you again, Henry, said Diana. A waiter approaches the table. He smiles and says, welcome to Higgins on the Reef. May I interest you folks in a beverage? Well, I'll have a glass of your house Cabernet, said Diana. I'll have a glass of PBR, said Henry. PBR? What's a PBR, sir? Said the waiter with a puzzled look. Henry laughs and says, a Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. Oh, I'm sorry, sir, we don't carry that one, said the waiter. Well, just bring me a Heineken and no glass, said Henry. Yes, sir, said the waiter. The waiter leaves. Henry and Diana converse. The waiter returns and serves the drinks. Henry toasts Diana's glass with a bottle of Heineken and says, here's to putting those 2 crooks in jail. Have you any idea how we can do that, Diana? Diana looks around and smiles and says, I sure do. I have learned a lot from my previous encounters with those 2. The previous victims refused to testify. Your willingness to testify will surely convict them. They may not go to jail, but at least we've stopped them. I can't wait to see the look on Eve's face. Just to be sure, we'll take a picture of you handing Eve the check. I'm going to use an actual camera instead of a cell phone. No one can argue that the photos were altered. I also have proof that the doctor and hospital reports are fake and false. Henry gets a concerned look on his face and says, you said you were going to take pictures. How will you do that? Won't that be dangerous for you? I'm going to hide in the kitchen until the right moment. I don't think Eve will be a problem, said Diana. Henry frowns slightly and says, I don't know, that sounds pretty risky. Trust me, Henry, said Diana. When this is all over with, I want to see more of you, Diana, said Henry as he looked into Diana's eyes. Diana noticed Henry's gaze and says, I'd like to see more of you too, Henry. Henry gives Diana a big hug. Henry smiles as he stirs a pot of sauerkraut. The smell of sauerkraut and Slovenian sausage, heavily laden with garlic, permeates Henry's condo. The doorbell rings. He opens the door and Eve enters. She is dressed in a low-cut dress and immediately gives Henry a big hug. Oh, Henry, I've missed you so much, said Eve. She does not see Henry roll his eyes. And I've missed you too, Eve, more than you can imagine. Please sit down. I've got dinner ready, said Henry with a smile. Eve sniffs and says, What's on the menu, Henry? Henry grins and says, Sauerkraut and Slovenian kielbasa. I don't think I've ever had that, said Eve. Oh, I think you will enjoy this. It's another one of my specialties. I made it especially for you. I'll be right back. Henry returns with the dinner and serves Eve. Henry and Eve converse as they eat. Eve keeps staring at her plate and eats reluctantly. How do you like the kielbasa, said Henry. Eve forces a smile and said, Oh, it's just wonderful, Henry. Great. Well, you see what I have for dessert, said Henry. Henry, if you don't mind, could we just skip the dessert? I'm getting full, said Eve. Sure, would you like something to drink, said Henry. I'll have a glass of 7-Up if you have some, said Eve. I don't have any 7-Up. Okay if I bring you a Pepsi, said Henry. Eve nods. Henry leaves the room. Eve gets up and moves to the sofa. Henry returns with a Pepsi and a can of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. Henry hands Eve the Pepsi and sits down next to her. They toast each other and then place the drinks on an end table. Eve embraces Henry and kisses him passionately several times, then puts her head on Henry's chest and begins to sob. Henry lifts Eve's head and touches her chin. Eve, are you worried about your mother again? Said Henry. Yes, I'm terribly worried. The doctor said she won't last long without the operation, said Eve. Henry smiles and says, You needn't worry, my dear. I have a check for you. I made it out for $175,000, just in case you may need a little more to tide you over while your mother recovers. The check is made out to your mother's name, just as you requested. Oh, Henry, you've been so good to us. I don't know how I can ever repay you, said Eve. Henry gets a big grin on his face, then gives Eve a long, passionate kiss and places his hand on her thigh. Eve says to herself, I better show this guy a little gratitude. Eve stands up and takes Henry's hand, then says, Where's your bedroom, Henry? Henry stands up and points to a door and then says with a big grin, Eve, you can't imagine how long I waited for this. Eve smiles and starts to lead Henry to the bedroom. Henry stops and says, Wait, let me get you the check. I wouldn't want you to forget it. Henry walks over to a desk and retrieves a check from the drawer. He walks over to Eve and hands her the check. Here you are, Eve, said Henry. Eve looks at the check and says, Oh, Henry, thank you, thank you. With a big grin, Henry says, No, thank you, my dear. Just then, Diana steps out from the kitchen and using a Nikon camera takes a picture of Eve holding the check. The flash startles Eve. She looks at Diana and screams loudly, You! Yes, it's me, and you're going to jail this time, sweetheart, said Diana. Eve snarls, You bitch, you can't prove anything. Diana smiles and says, Guess again. I have absolute proof of the fraudulent doctor and hospital records. Along with these photos, let's see what a jury will decide. Maybe you want to have your sick mother testify on your behalf. I know Henry is going to testify. Eve lifts her dress and retrieves a small Smith & Wesson snub-nosed .38 caliber revolver from a holster on her leg. She points the pistol at Diana and screams, I'm not going to prison. Give me that damn camera. I will not. Drop that gun. Do you want assault with a deadly weapon added to the charges, said Diana. I said, Give me the camera, said Eve as she intensifies her aim at Diana. Go to hell, said Diana as she feels her heart pounding in her chest. Eve cocks the hammer on the revolver and says, Have it your way. Diana hears the click and closes her eyes. Eve does not notice Henry as he approaches her from behind. As Eve pulls the trigger, Henry grabs her arm. The shot misses Diana. Eve and Henry struggle. Another shot is heard. Henry clutches his shoulder and falls to the floor. Diana grabs a wine bottle and hits Eve over the head with it. Eve drops the pistol and falls to the floor. Diana grabs the phone, dials a number, and said, "Hello, 911. She talks into the phone, then hangs up and rushes to Henry's side. She notices the red spot on his shoulder growing larger. Diana cradles his head in her arms and says in a sorrowful voice, "Oh, Henry." Henry is laying in a hospital bed. A nurse enters and walks up to Henry. "You rang, sir?" said the nurse. "Yes, I'm thirsty and my shoulder hurts like hell," said Henry in a weak voice. "What would you like?" said the nurse. Henry gives a faint smile and says, "How about a can of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer?" The nurse frowns and says, "Very funny. You're pretty frisky for a man that just got shot. If your lady friend wouldn't have stopped the bleeding, you might not have made it." "My lady friend," said Henry with a puzzled look. "Yes, she said her name was Diana. She spent the night here while we operated on you. She must care an awful lot about you," said the nurse. "Where is she now?" said Henry. "She's asleep in the waiting room. Should I go get her?" said the nurse. "No, please let her sleep," said Henry. The nurse took Henry's blood pressure and temperature, then adjusted his pillow and said, "Here's a pain pill and some water to drink. This pill may make you drowsy. Ring if you need anything else." "Well, thank you," said Henry. Henry takes the pill and a drink of water. The nurse leaves. Henry falls asleep. Diana enters the room and sits by Henry's side. Henry eventually wakes up. Diana stands up and smiles and says, "Hello, Henry." She holds Henry's hand and kisses him on his forehead. Henry holds on to Diana's hand. "Hello, Diana. I hear you saved my life. Thank you," said Henry. Diana sighs and says, "Oh, Henry, it was the other way around. You saved my life. Eve's shot just missed me. Thanks to you. I guess we're both two lucky people." Henry looks into Diana's eyes and said, "Yes, we are. Diana, have you ever seen the movie Pride of the Yankees with Gary Cooper?" Diana nods and says, "Many years ago." Henry's voice takes on a serious tone. "Do you remember the last scene when Lou Gehrig is giving his final farewell speech at Yankee Stadium? He knows that his time is limited and he says, 'I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.' Well, that's me, the luckiest man on the face of the earth. And let me tell you why I feel that way. It's not because I survived a close call, but I was lucky to meet you." "Do you believe in love at first sight?" said Henry. Diana sighs. "I don't believe I do, Henry," said Diana. "Well, neither do I, but I sure believe in love at second sight." "So do I," said Diana with a smile. A tear forms in her eye, and she gives Henry a soft but lingering kiss. Seated at the dining room table are Danny and Rose, Don and Martha, Diana and Henry. Henry's arm is in a sling. Diana is sitting next to Henry. Henry stands up and says, "I want to thank you all for all of the get well cards. I have to admit it was quite an experience that Diana and I went through." "How are you feeling, Henry? You're looking pretty chipper," said Martha. Henry sits down and says, "I'm doing okay, Martha. I'm going to have an announcement to make after we get done eating." Don sniffs and says, "What's on the menu, Henry? Something smells darn good." "Sauerkraut and Slovenian kielbasa. That's one of my specialties," said Henry with a big grin. "Oh, my goodness, that's one of my favorites," said Rose with a smile. "So what happened to the two gold diggers, Dad?" said Danny. Diana looked around the table and said, "They caught up with the mother at the Greyhound bus depot. She was on her way to California. She was lucky and just received a 90-day term at Ocala and 3 years probation. Sort of a slap on the wrist, so to speak. Eve was a different story. She probably would have got off with a light sentence like Mother, but her pulling a gun out and shooting Henry changed the picture dramatically. Her trial is coming up and she will do some serious jail time. I hate to say it, but she's getting exactly what she deserves. Don laughs and says, Henry, will you be serving winking owl at this meal? Henry grins and says, are you kidding with Slovenian kielbasa? I've got Pabst Blue Ribbon in the fridge. Who wants a beer? Everyone raises their hand. Henry and Danny leave the room, then return. Henry and Danny are carrying beer. The group starts eating and conversing. After dessert is served, Henry stands up and says, I told you all that I have an announcement to make. Dad, did you buy another Harley? Said Danny. Something much better, son. Diana and I got engaged. You will all be going to a wedding at Christmas time. Henry reaches in his pocket and pulls out a ring box. Diana, we need to make this official. Please stand up. Diana stands up next to Henry. Henry opens up the ring box and shows Diana the ring. Diana wipes a tear from her eye. Henry puts the ring on Diana's finger. They embrace and kiss. The group claps heartily. Henry and Diana lived happily ever after.